of the conference. My name is Sil Flores, the state EEO and ADA coordinator with the Kentucky Personnel Cabinet's Office of Diversity, Equality, and Training. I will be acting as an MC for the conference, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. Now, before we move on to our next presenter, just a quick reminder that you may post questions in the chat. Our speakers will address as many questions as possible after the presentation. Now, without further ado, our next speaker is Vivian Hairston Blade. Now, Vivian is recognized as a top 100 global HR influencer. She's a best-selling author, and she's also a certified speaking professional, a CSP. Today, Vivian will share her expertise and insights on how to manage difficult conversations. Please join me in welcoming Vivian Blade.
Thank you so much, Sil. Hello, everyone. It is great to be with you, and I'm excited to have this time to talk with you about actually a topic we're not necessarily so excited to address every day when we face some of these difficult conversations, but we're going to talk about how to manage them today. Before we dig in, I have a question for you. So as you think back along the last couple of weeks, would you say you've had at least one instance where you were faced with having a conversation with somebody you work with that was rather uncomfortable? You would say a conversation that you really didn't want to have? Well, I bet you can think of at least one of those. Well, let me share with you a conversation that I didn't want to have. So meet my granddaughter. My husband and I, we have two grandchildren, Nosley and Novak. Nosley is 2 years old. Novak is 4. And as you can see here, Nosley loves the phone. And one day, I'm Gigi, they call me Gigi. So Gigi and the kids were on the floor. We were playing Old McDonald's Farm. There were farm animals everywhere, and my phone was resting on the floor next to me. Well, Nosley comes over and she picks up the phone and she begins to play with it, as she often does. Well, a couple of minutes later, I realize, I think she's talking to somebody. There's somebody on the other end of the line. So as I negotiate the phone away from her very carefully and say hello, I realize it's the 911 operator. So, oh no. So here I am apologizing profusely to the operator and letting her know that, oh, my granddaughter, she accidentally called you. We're so sorry. And of course, the operator made me repeat several times that we were okay. We didn't need any emergency service, and so I was able to allay those fears. At the end of the call, I go back and I look at Nosley. I said, Nosley, look, you can call Santa. You can call Gigi and Grandpa when your mom and dad tell you no about something. But please, please don't call the 911 operator again. And of course, she had no idea what I was talking about, but that is a conversation that I don't want to have by accident, and I don't want to have for real in the future. You know, we have many conversations at work that we want to avoid, conversations that we don't want to have. And sometimes we throw our hands up like this. I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. But we know those conversations are important. They are necessary for us to have. We don't want to go through feeling like this. And I know we can all probably relate to having these feelings on the inside, where we might come across calm, cool, and collected on the outside. What are some of those difficult conversations that we tend to have? And we're going to talk more about how we get through those today. But some of those conversations, let's think about a time when maybe somebody's performance does not meet necessarily expectations. You've got a couple of people who work together. They've got different personalities. They've got different communication styles, and they don't necessarily work as well together. Sometimes you may have people who are from different generations. You know, we have 5 generations working in the workforce today. And with those different experiences, those different points of view, sometimes they don't necessarily see things the same way, see things eye to eye. Oftentimes, a lot of these conversations that we avoid come down to needing to give and provide and have some kind of discussion around feedback. And giving feedback puts us in some of the most uncomfortable and stressful situations in our work lives, in our day to day. So, my promise to you today is that you're going to walk away with some strategies that can help you to manage these difficult conversations with greater confidence, with greater empathy, and with greater professionalism. So, here's what we're going to walk through. We're going to do three things on our agenda during our time together. First, we're going to look at what are some of the reasons why we avoid these difficult conversations. What's the impact of that? Why is that important? Secondly, I want to share with you a roadmap to change. If you want to go from more cautious to more confident, what's a path to be able to get there? Not just in what we're going to talk about today, but in anything that you do. And then third, we're going to look at a framework, the CRISP framework for how do you navigate these difficult dialogues. I'm going to show you step by step how you prepare and how you actually get through those conversations. So be prepared to take notes and engage too, because I'm going to engage your thinking. I'm going to challenge you a bit as we go through our time together. Now, one of my first questions for you, again, is why do you tend to avoid difficult conversations? What is it for you that gives you that pit in your stomach that says, oh, yeah, this is one of those I want to avoid with a 10-foot pole? Well, what I find when I'm working with different professionals, leaders, and teams, and let me share with you an experience that I had with one team that is in the food services industry that I was coaching. And I was trying to get some insight and information from them about what are some of the challenges that your team is going through that's creating a lot of this conflict, people not really working well together, not being able to be effective in their work day to day, creating a lot of stress for people when they came in. So a lot of it came down to lack of communication and avoiding some of the difficult conversations that they needed to have. As I was talking to one professional, she said, well, I don't like to rock the boat. I really don't want to hurt people's feelings. So I just kind of keep to myself. Another person says, well, I'm not sure what approach I need to use to have the conversation. And I don't want to do anything wrong for sure. And another person said, well, I just thought that if I let it go a little bit, all of this would just go away. Oh, but we know what happens when we just let things go, don't they? They don't get better, but they get worse. It's like leaving an old moldy loaf of bread out on the counter for weeks on end. It gets smelly, doesn't it? Yeah. So we can't do that. These are conversations that we don't not only have to have, but we need to have. They are so important for us because when we provide feedback, when we think about feedback constructively and think about those opportunities, we find that it grows engagement. Do you want to be in a workplace where there is more engagement, where you feel more engaged? And as we look at some of the Gallup research, Gallup shows us that when people get feedback at least once a week, over almost half of the people in their survey said, oh, yes, I am highly engaged when I get that kind of feedback and we have those kinds of conversations. So ultimately, what we're trying to create is this environment where you can genuinely say, this is a place where I love to work and I feel valued. And all of us, each and every one of us, whether you're a leader or whatever your role is in the organization, we all have an opportunity to contribute to that result. I want you to imagine for a moment. So I'm going to ask you to close your eyes for just a moment. And I want you to imagine that it's in the morning. You hear your alarm go off And as you're waking up with those groggy eyes, you realize, oh, it's Monday. Now I'm going to ask you, how do you feel about your Monday mornings? Well, in this case, you feel excited. You are excited that it's a Monday morning. You get up with energy because you know that when you get to work, you're going to have people who are excited to see you, be with you. You work well together. You communicate. You work out your challenges and your problems together. You have an opportunity to contribute to something bigger than yourself. To meaningful work, taking care of all the people that you have to take care of and each other in your day-to-day work. Now, I want you to open your eyes for a moment. And then I want you to think for a moment as you think back over what you imagined. If you were to rate on a scale of 1 to 5 whether this was your true experience at work, as you think about getting up on a Monday morning, how would you rate that? Would you rate that 1, like, no, definitely not, I don't like going to work? Or would it be a 5? Yes, I'm excited and energized, and I go in and I energize other people on my team. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the relationships that we build. It's about the human connections. It's about seeing each other as human beings and respecting each other. And we are intentional about building those connections and seeing the human first and knowing that everything that we do, we have each other's best interest at heart. So at the end of the day, I can say, this has been a great day. And yes, this is a place where I love to work. I love to be. I love to contribute. And I feel valued. That's our goal. That's our mission. So, how do you go from being cautious, overly cautious, to being more confident in these difficult dialogues that we have to have? I want to share with you a roadmap to change. So, anytime that we are looking at changing ourselves, our process in our personal lives, at work, any of those, anytime we come into those situations, we have to go through a change and our shift ourselves. So there are 3 phases of this roadmap to becoming future ready to navigating change that I want you to follow. So make sure you write this down. Your first phase is to reframe, and then you reinvent and you reignite. Now, I'm going to talk about these in the context in a moment about how we apply this to having difficult dialogues. When we reframe, we're going to reframe the opportunity. We're reframing our mindset, what we think about what we're going to engage in. The second phase is to reinvent your approach. What you've been doing is not working. What do they say? The definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing and thinking that you're going to get the same result. Well, it just doesn't happen that way, right? So we've got to do some things differently. And then the third phase is to reignite momentum. How do you step in with commitment? So our previous speaker talked a lot about commitment, accountability, and taking action. This is where the rubber meets the road. So we're going to use this model of how we navigate change because what we're doing today around difficult conversations, we need to shift a little bit. So how do we approach that? Let's take a look at that. Your first phase is to reframe the opportunity. Shift your mindset. We have to think differently about the opportunity. So many times we're focused on the negative, right? Fear, when we look at all those reasons why we don't have difficult dialogues, a lot of it has to do with the fear that we have. It reminds me of now I'm a Weight Watchers person, and we have this list of foods that you shouldn't eat. You got this list of foods that you should eat, and so often when we're losing weight, we're focused on the foods that we can't eat, and we're lamenting over what we're missing, and we fail to see the opportunity to get all these wonderful foods that we can eat, should eat, and how much healthier and much better we're going to feel as a result of that. So that's what we have to do when we think about difficult dialogues, is think about what's the opportunity, what's the benefit, see that half glass full. Now, I have some questions here that you can ask yourself and think through. And in fact, as we go through a lot of these stages and some of the things I'm going to share with you today, I'm going to give you some questions that you can reflect on, as well as questions and things that you can use in some of these dialogues and interactions. So, your first area here, as we think about being open-minded and shifting our mindset, is to think about, well, why is this dialogue important? Why is this important to do? What's at stake if I don't have this important dialogue, if I don't share the feedback, the constructive feedback that I know we need to have? And then, well, what could be the outcome if we do engage in this dialogue? What's the benefit as a result? And that's where we have to focus because that helps to give us the courage that we need to engage. So, your first phase, reframe that mindset. Think about the possibilities. Now, your second phase of navigating change and re engineering what you're doing today is to reinvent your approach. Sometimes we just have to shake things up a little bit. Say, shake things up. Just shake things up. Where what was working before, as you see, is not working. You still get that pit in your stomach. So, I'm going to share with you a framework for how you prepare for a difficult conversation. And I'm going to walk you through the steps to reinventing your approach. How do you engage in these difficult dialogues? There are 5 steps to the CRISP framework. Your C is to clarify the issue and what is the outcome that we want to have? What's the purpose of having the conversation? Your second step is the R, which is ready, set, go. And this is all about preparation. Your third step is the I, and the I is to invite dialogue, have a conversation, actually have a conversation. Your fourth step is the S, which is to really get a sense for what's going on in the situation. So it's a situation assessment as we are in the moment. And then your fifth step, which is the P, is problem solving and next steps. So what are we going to do? What's that action we're going to take? And how are we going to move forward? Now, I want to dig into each of these so that you have some strategies to walk away for reinventing your approach to these difficult dialogues. Your C, your very first step here is to clarify the issue and the purpose. And here we're going to assess the concern. We're going to see, is this really a concern? First of all, and then what is the purpose of the conversation? What's the outcome we want to have from this? And oftentimes we're making assumptions about what we think is going on, and we need to dig in. So we're going to look at what are some questions you can ask to be able to assess the situation. And then we're going to look at our assumptions, how we make assumptions as human beings. So here are some of your questions. What is actually the concern? Is this a pattern or not? What are the facts? What additional information do I need? What is the impact of what is going on here to the business and even on our team? What's been my role? So we always need to reflect in the mirror and see if I contributed in some way to the issue here, the challenge that needs to be addressed. And then what's the outcome? What outcome needs to result from this dialogue so that you go into it and you're thinking about it with intention? Again, so often we are just making assumptions, and so we need some time to make sure that we step back and reflect. Now, let's think about checking our assumptions for a moment. In just a moment, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to review some common statements that we all know. I'm going to show those on the screen, and I want you to write down what you see. So write down the statements. Again, you're familiar with these, so write them down, and then we're going to come back and talk about them in just a moment. All right, so ready? I'm going to give you 10 seconds. Make sure you write them down. All right. Common phrases. So what did you see? What did you write down on on that you saw on the screen? Go ahead and look at what you wrote. And I want to ask, I want to challenge your sight, what you saw. Now, we are so familiar with barking up the wrong tree, a dime a dozen, and a piece of cake, right? But did you notice that there are some duplicate words in those phrases? You made an assumption that, oh, this is just like I usually say it and like I know it. But there's barking up the wrong tree, a dime a dozen, and a piece of a cake. So a little twist there, a little surprise there for you. But this just helps us to realize that we are making assumptions and we need to take that time to step back and think because we're often focused. And I love this analogy of the iceberg because there's so much more going on. The iceberg is so much bigger underneath the surface than what we actually see on top. So we're often focused on what's going on in the top and fail to realize and recognize everything that's going on underneath. When we step back to really understand what's going on, and then we'll use more of this as we get into inviting dialogue as well, so that we get a better understanding, not just from ourselves, but this gives us a first view of, not just looking at the surface, but digging in a bit. Okay. All right, so that is your C, clarify the issue and the purpose of your conversation. Now, let's go on to the R, ready, set, go. This is your second step. Ready, set, go is all about preparation. Did you watch the Olympics? Fascinating. I love watching the Olympics. There are so many sports that are just so fascinating to watch. But we know that the athletes didn't just walk up, to compete that day. They did a heck of a lot to prepare and get ready for their competition. They prepared in a couple of areas. One, they have to prepare themselves, prepare their mindset, right? Prepare their bodies also, physical training. And then they have to prepare their skill and prepare their skill and prepare as they are getting ready to enter the competition each time. So they're getting ready for all of that. We have to do the same when we are getting ready to have a difficult dialogue. That's one of the big stressors for us. So the more you are prepared, the more calm and confident you can be. So we have to think about what is my own mindset? What's holding me back a little bit? What's my emotional temperature? Emotional intelligence goes a long way. So that skill set, using an emotional intelligence assessment at a time like this is going to help you to better understand yourself and help you to check in with the other person. And then we have to prepare for the conversation. Make some notes. Outline what it is you want to talk about. Make sure that you're using good timing. Sometimes the timing of in the moment is good when you see that opportunity for feedback. Sometimes it's good for you both from an emotional standpoint or, sometimes feedback doesn't need to be given in front of a crowd. So think about the timing. Also, you want to invite someone to the conversation and let them know what we're going to be talking about. But make sure that you don't if there's feedback that you come across and you decide that I want to do this on a Friday, don't give the invitation on Friday. You and the other person are going to be worried about it all weekend until you have the conversation early the following week. So just think about that and be considerate of the other individual. So being ready also means we have to think about it's a form of communication. How are we going to communicate and know that communication is not a perfect science? It is an art at least. So we have to really think about all the challenges that go in between a conversation. I have an intention around what I want to communicate. There's noise in the middle, sometimes literal noise and figurative noise and emotional noise, all those things. How is the dialogue going to be received on the other end? So planning and thinking about that as well, making sure that we're using the right medium also for our conversation is important for us to consider. So getting ready, set, and then go. And so being well prepared. Once we're prepared, your third step is the I, and that is we're going to invite dialogue. Dialogue, a conversation, It's not a monologue. It is a conversation. So that means we're going to have a two-way conversation here. I love this quote by Stephen Covey from his book, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, his fifth habit, which is seek first to understand, then be understood. So we're going to seek first to understand, then be understood, inviting that dialogue. Now, there are a couple of things you need to do in your process as you are inviting dialogue. First, as you get into the conversation, you're going to set the stage for what this conversation is about. What are we here to talk about? And you want to open the conversation. I like to do that with often a benefit of the doubt statement. You may not realize that, and describe the current behavior that needs to be adjusted. So, what is the concern? So, describe that. Be specific so that as you tell me that, I can relate. As you are getting into the conversation, remember, there may be some time that has lapsed. There may be, different occasions. So be specific about what you have observed or what the concern is so that you can address that head on. And then you want to describe, why is this important? Why does this matter? So what has the impact been to the business and on our team? And you've thought about that a little bit earlier. So you've got some of that insight available to talk about. And then you want to use questions as you invite dialogue. So you opened with some information, setting the stage. Now let's ask some open-ended questions. Can you help me understand? Or what do you think? So open-ended or probing questions that are declarative. Things like, well, tell me more about that. Or please explain. It's funny. My grandson was thinking about an animal at the zoo and wondering sort of what might have happened to it because it was not there. So he started asking more questions about, well, where do you think it could be? Where is it? And so we are able to get in this dialogue and we can create an understanding. It goes back to a saying that my mother used to say all the time: there is nothing like an understanding, and to have that communication so that we can gather an understanding. So questions are your ally here. A situation assessment is the next step in your process. That's step number 4. And when we think about a situation assessment, we are going to be in the moment. So how can you be in the moment so that you are listening to what's going on, you are observing what's going on, and you are adapting based on what you are sensing. So this needs some agility, some skill around agility and adaptability. Now, let's talk about listening for a moment. You have to think about what the other person is saying and not be so focused on just how you're going to respond. There are 5 stages of listening. We can ignore, we can pretend listen, we can listen selectively. And when I think about those, I think about conversations that we might be having when, you're talking to somebody, they're on their cell phone. You don't know whether they're listening or not, right? And it's annoying because you don't feel like you're being heard. So it's not until we can get to active listening and empathetic listening that we can even move beyond the concern to be able to get to solutions. So listening and being able to listen effectively is critically important. Let's look a little bit more about what we mean by active listening. So there are 3 ways to do active listening. There is paraphrasing. So that is, I'm going to use my own words to repeat what someone else has said. Just phrase it, use their words, but phrase it a little bit differently. So paraphrase. Summarize is using my own words and sort of creating a summary of what I think I heard. And then the third area is to repeat back, and that's using the exact words that someone has said. Now, that doesn't mean that we are acting like a parrot. We know parrots parrot back the same thing, but that parroting, that repeating back says, oh, yeah, I hear you. And it lets the other person clarify and know that you are listening, you are engaging, that they have been heard. So active listening, and these three types of active listening are going to help you. Now let's talk about the observing piece, and all of that listening, adapting, observing is going to help us to adapt. When we communicate, there are many cues. There's much more than just the words that we say as we are communicating. We have verbal cues, we have nonverbal cues. You know, I'm one of those people, my daughter will tell me that when we're doing something or maybe watching a movie or something, and I'm looking at something, she will say, Mom, you should see your face. So I'm one of those where nonverbal cues oftentimes plays a role in my communication. But some of the verbal cues, what are those? So those are things like your voice quality, your intonation, your speed, some of the emphasis that you might put on words or phrases, things that you really want to get across, how much energy you use when you come across. All those are important. What are you getting from the other individual as well on these verbal cues? And what's that telling you? Those nonverbal cues, again, it reminds me of that song. It's written all over your face. You don't have to say a word. It's an old R&B song. I don't know if you might be familiar with that one, but these nonverbal cues, they also tell us a lot. So there are things like, and as you see, I use my hands a lot. I love to talk with my hands. There are things like eye contact or lack thereof. One of the things that we need to be aware of too, that sometimes different cultures utilize eye contact or gesturing differently. So we need to be aware of that and respectful of that as well. But proximity, I had a boss one time who came from an old manufacturing environment. And when he was angry about something or upset, he wanted to make sure that you knew that he didn't like it and would be up in your face. So, and of course, that was unsettling for everyone. And how far do you think that would go? Not very far, and really motivating people to change or act differently. Think about when you send an email. Have you gotten that email that has like everything in all caps, or, all the emojis, or everybody is in the world is copied, in the CC line? Yeah, so we've all gotten some of those. We can balance some of that. That's not necessarily so, but all those things they speak, even though we might not be saying anything. So let's keep that in mind. Now, in light of all of these things, how do we, again, emotional intelligence is really an important skill for you here, but how do you absorb the things that are going on within yourself and the other person and within the dialogue, and adapt accordingly and make adjustments? And it's not until you can get to that point, again, empathetic listening says to the other person, I have been heard. That doesn't mean you have to agree. You don't agree with everything, but it says, I have been heard. That allows you to go to the next step, which is collaboration on problem solving and determining what your next steps are going to be. So when we are collaborating on problem solving, you will come with some ideas. Here's how you approach this part of it. You will have thought about, okay, here is, as we mentioned, the behavior that we need to see change, or the concern and what we would like to see different. And now we begin with, here is the behavior or the change that we would like to see. And why is that important? What difference does that make? So reflecting on that and describe that. You're going to invite dialogue again, because this is not just an authoritative approach in giving direction, but we are engaging the individual so that there is, our previous speaker talked about accountability, right? And motivating around accountability. So engaging them and coming up with some ideas around next steps and solutions. And once you do that, and here's some questions you can use. What ideas do you have? How would you suggest we approach this? Once you come to some agreement, then you want to get commitment because nothing happens until you move on and have commitment. So commit around, what would you agree to? How does this feel? Can I get your commitment? Is there anything else that you are concerned about? When should we check in? How can I support you on this? So that collaborative approach to engagement and commitment will help you together to move forward. All right, so on reinventing your approach, the second phase for change, you have learned how to prepare for and how to actually go through the steps of a difficult dialogue. And those are your C, your first step, which is to clarify the issue and the purpose of the conversation. Your second step is the R. Ready, set, go. We're going to be prepared. Your third step is the I, where we invite dialogue in. Your fourth step is the S. It's the situation assessment where we're going to listen, we're going to observe, and adapt if we need to. And then the fifth step is to problem solve. It's the P, and determine next steps so that we can move forward. Now, one key thing I want you to remember about this CRISP framework for navigating difficult dialogue is that crisp conversations create connection. I want you to write this down. This is really important. Crisp conversations create connection. And when we go into them with the right intention and giving our best interest at heart and knowing that there is trust there, then we can create connection. Another thing to keep in mind is the fact that different generations have different preferences in communicating. You saw Nosley, right now, she likes to pick up the phone. I eventually bought her own little kitty phone who takes pictures and does all kinds of little things. But different generations have different preferences. Also, different individuals have different preferences, but this is just a reminder, and you can feel free to come back to the slide a little bit later and look at, okay, what are some of the differences in generations that I might need to consider as I'm thinking about how to communicate. All right, now let's go back to this third phase in how are you going to change? What's your roadmap to being future ready and to changing? And that third step is that I've got to integrate what I am doing into my day-to-day practice and inspire people to engage with me. So reignite momentum is all about how do I really create some new habits around this and make it constructive, make feedback something that we want to do and that we do, again, with the best interest in mind with each other. Go back to using a coaching approach. How can I lean in and make sure that I'm thinking about how do I use constructive feedback as an opportunity to help develop, to help someone grow, and how can I also be receptive to that also? So being able to practice things differently and do things differently and commit to that is critically important. And when we do that, it builds trust, it builds respect for each other. All right, so your roadmap for change. And as we use this in having and managing difficult conversations, we have learned that we have to reframe the opportunity, shift our mindset so that we are seeing the benefits, the possibilities of having difficult dialogues, and not just the negative and all the stress, that comes with difficult dialogues. Your second phase is to shake it up. We're going to reinvent your approach by using the CRISP framework of difficult dialogues. CRISP conversations create connection. And that's what we're after. We're after building those relationships. And then your third phase is to reignite momentum by integrating, taking action. What am I going to do to integrate this into my daily practice? And how am I going to create positiveness around it so that I engage and inspire others to be engaged in positive feedback on a day-to-day basis? All right, now here's what I want you to do to get started. How do you take the things that we have talked about today and start to action it? You know, start to make it a reality and begin to actually integrate it into your practice. You're going to do a couple of things. One is you're going to reflect on a recent difficult conversation that you avoided, or one that maybe you should have had that you didn't, and one that you had that probably could have gone better. And think, what are some of the opportunities that I have to integrate some of the things that we talked about today into my practice? So how can I integrate that into my approach? The second thing you can do is thinking about an opportunity that you have going forward. So how can I take, again, what we've learned today, and as I plan for, and as I think about the next difficult conversation, how can I integrate and plan in, some of the things that I've learned here today for those conversations? A great approach to learning a new skill is to have an accountability partner. Is there a trusted colleague you can go alongside each other and talk about how you're starting to use some of these new skills and building on it, and really partner going forward? Give each other some honest, constructive feedback, and you could even use the approaches that we've talked about today to give each other feedback. A coach, much like the work that I do with a lot of the clients I work with, can also help guide you and provide some feedback and give you a safe space also to practice some things. So I love the coach approach. So some things that you can do. Now I'm going to challenge you. Nothing happens unless we do something with it, unless we do something about it. So I'm going to challenge you on one action. What is one action that you're going to commit to begin to do things differently, to be more courageous and confident in the difficult conversations that you can have? I want you to think about feedback as a gift that we can give to each other. And so maybe it's that I'll go back and reflect so that I can make sure that I've done some reflecting and thinking before I get ready for my next conversation. Or I've got a conversation coming up really soon, and I'm going to spend some time thinking about and planning how to utilize what we've learned today. I've got some resources for you. So of course you have these slides that will provide all the insight that we've covered. You can go back to it as a resource, and make sure that you go back and print out the CRISP conversations framework so that you have that too as a ready reference when you need it and resource. All right. So again, I encourage you to think about how having these difficult dialogues, crisp conversations, will create connection. And it's so important for you and the health of your organization, and to be able to get up and be energized as you go to work each and every day. We're going to take some questions, and then I'll come back and have some closing comments with you.
Vivian, you brought up so many great points, and there were a lot of themes in that conversation. Some of the things that I've seen coming through is that question around the fear. I know we touched on it a little bit, and it's almost like it's not so much the fear of the unknown, but it's the fear of what we think we know, and engage in those conversations. Oh, I think they're going to act this way or that way. Do you mind giving us a little bit more tips in maybe addressing that fear, and how do we conquer that anxiety and stress leading up to that big point?
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of the fear oftentimes comes from one, not knowing how to have the conversations. So the things that we talked about today, the framework that I shared with you on how to have a crisp conversation, on thinking about how to re-engineer your own mindset and your process, and integrating this into your daily practice is going to help tremendously. I think a second thing is oftentimes we don't have trust. We don't have relationships. And if you go back to one of the things that I talked about earlier with really thinking about, do I see the other person? Do I respect them? Are we working on building relationships? Do we have a foundation of trust? Do we have a foundation of best interest at heart? So foundationally, you have to go back a little bit and work on your environment and your relationships. And as you do, and if you have good intentions and really thinking about constructive feedback and really going back and doing the things that we talked about today, they're going to help you to have more effective conversations. And then you have to practice. That's where having an accountability partner or using a coach will help you, because the more you practice, the better you'll be. And then we're still going to get nervous when we come into having these conversations. So when you get nervous, first of all, breathe. Just take a moment. And oftentimes we rush in. We talked about those assumptions that we make. Oftentimes we will jump in without really even thinking, and sometimes situations are emotionally charged. So if we take a moment to step back, breathe, and then think about, and I love the C because it's clarifying the issue. If we just have a moment to do that, clarifying the issue and the purpose for the conversation, that will get us in a good frame of mind and a set where we can begin to engage with another individual.
It almost has to go with the reframing. We have another question come in from the chat, and what if you're going into this conversation and you already feel that it's going to go nowhere, that the conversation is kind of pointless? What are some tips in addressing maybe that mindset, or if being prepared, and if you think the conversation is going to go nowhere, you already tried to have some conversations prior and they were unsuccessful?
Yeah. I like what the previous speaker talked about. He said, you can only change your own mindset and your own actions, or control, something like that. I know I didn't get that exactly right, but that was something that he said earlier that I wrote down. So we can only control ourselves. We cannot control other individuals. And we know that uh, we can't change, and not everybody wants to move forward or be on board, so we can't necessarily control that. What we can do is, one, anticipate the conversation and what we think the dialogue might be. The other thing is, we can think about what's important to the other individual, what's important for them. Why would this conversation and the outcomes of this conversation be important for them? And even as you engage in the conversation, exploring that with them. And and you have to get underneath the iceberg. There is so much typically going on with people that we don't see, and we make assumptions. So if we can dig in and invite dialogue and really understand what's going on, then sometimes that can go a long way. The listening piece and listening with empathy. Empathy doesn't mean I have to agree, and empathy doesn't mean that I don't hold people accountable. It means that I am listening. I hear you. The other person knows that I hear you, and we're going to work together in an approach forward. So again, not everybody is open-minded and willing to change and go along, but if you're working on that, if you treat people with respect, and sometimes before you can get to the point where you are having good, constructive conversations, you have to work on your culture. You have to work on building a foundation of trust. So there might be work that has to be done there first. I work on with organizations a lot on that, working on trust first and our values, and how do we live out our values then we can trust that, oh, we have each other's best interest at heart. And this is going to be important for me, for all of us as we move forward. So I hope some of those suggestions will be helpful.
I love that you've touched on multiple times culture, right? And it's about the mindset and how we go into it and having an organizational support in those decisions. Another question came through. We prepared ourselves for the conversation. We follow the steps. We're ready. We engage in the conversation. The outcome is negative. It did not go as we anticipated. What are some techniques or tips that you might have in handling the negative outcomes from having those difficult conversations?
We have to realize, and we do, and just that situation that you described, difficult conversations are emotional for everybody. So there are emotions on both sides. And a lot of times people on the receiving end can feel, on the defensive oftentimes. So what can we do to make people feel comfortable? When the outcome does not go as you expected, sometimes we have to think about this is not just one conversation. What are multiple conversations that we may need to have to get to the outcome that we need to get to? But at the end of the day, even if you're not getting to the outcome that you want, especially at this stage, you want to come to some form of agreement at the end of the conversation. What do we do next? And you can ask, what do you think are the best next steps? Where do we go from here? Here are the expectations that I have, what I believe needs to happen. What do you think should be the next steps? And get their engagement in some of that, again, some ownership in that, and hope to see then from that collaboration and an awareness of the emotion that you can move. Again, it may not be to the ultimate outcome that you want, but maybe you're beginning to make some progress toward that. So go into it too, a little bit open-minded, that the outcome that I want, and it's like negotiating, right? It's not necessarily exactly what has to happen at the end, but what would be acceptable at this point? What do I want to work toward? And so part of that might be even setting up these difficult conversations as some of those steps toward an ultimate change or difference.
And that actually prompted another question from the audience, is you start to have these kind of difficult conversations and we're having the steps in place to have multiples, but what if there's tension there and maybe the tension's growing, or how do you address that tension after a difficult conversation with someone?
Yeah. And there's going to be emotion. There's absolutely address the emotion, because it's the, I was going to say the elephant in the room, but sometimes the elephant in the room is sometimes what we sort of know that's there, but we don't necessarily talk about. So I guess it is the elephant in the room. But address the emotion. Tell me what's going on. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? I noticed that there's a lot of emotion going on here. Can you tell me more about that? So invite dialogue and see if you can make some headway into understanding what's underneath the iceberg in some of those cases. And also check our own emotion. Emotional intelligence, again, goes a long way here, because we can get a feel for emotional intelligence says, I can understand what is going on inside of me, how that's making me react. I also understand how my actions and emotions are creating emotions and reactions in other people. I can also read and get that sense from other people. So there's a lot at play in emotional intelligence, but that will help you to also understand and sort of check yourself. Is there something that I'm contributing here? And always go back and spend some self-reflection time as well.
So important. Again, I love that you're emphasizing emotion. We all have emotion. It's okay to feel certain emotions and be emotional, but it's how do we manage those emotions?
Sure.
And something else that just came through. Now, I think it's a great question. I know that you've had numerous trainings and workshops, and just as Brian had mentioned about teamwork, and we've mentioned teamwork here, What are some good team building exercises that you would promote? Maybe from the standpoint if you're with a new team, or maybe if you have a team, then you've had some of these issues before and you're trying to, reignite the group.
Yeah. Team building around this goes back to building trust and relationships foundationally. And so the things that you want to do around team building are going to be focused around trust. You mentioned maybe there's a new manager that's coming on board. One of the things that I love to do with new managers is called the new manager assimilation. And that's an opportunity for a new manager to come in. You bring your team, you're off-site, and you're sort of in a more informal environment. You have somebody who is facilitating for you. So I do this a lot with clients I work with. But the you come in and the leader, shares some information about themselves. And then the leader will go away, and then the facilitator will have an opportunity to get questions or things that people that they work with want to know about the leader. And so all these questions and things are anonymous. They are personal things. They are professional and work related. And then the leader comes back in the room and you can go through those, and people feel more of a sense of, I know this person, there's no fear of, well, I'm afraid to ask that question because it's all anonymous, but you have an opportunity to have a conversation. The leader also gets to understand what's on people's minds. What are they concerned about? What do they care about? And begin to address those things. So all the things around building trust. One of the things I like to do around trust building is thinking about your values. Oftentimes we have values that are stated that we do not live. They are on the wall or they are in the drawer. And we don't have expectations and behaviors defined around those. So another good starting point is what really is important for us, not only as an organization, you can also have team values. And what does that mean for our contract with each other? And how do we hold ourselves accountable for that in a constructive way? So those are a couple of examples that I hope were helpful.
Those were excellent examples because of what you said. I love the assimilation of the leadership. It's a way for the leader to come in and also then learn the existing culture and then start to share the information. Like I said, trust building and building those organic, natural relationships. I'm sure that will also help address when it's time to have difficult conversations in the workplace.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
the last question, we're just about at time, is the CRISP framework. How can we apply this? And it's at work, but what about if we applied it in other aspects of our personal lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to have some closing comments after this answer. But absolutely, it works in all facets of our lives because we have difficult conversations and difficult dialogues everywhere in every situation that we come in personal, at at school, on our kids' soccer team, or whatever it is. There in every aspect of our lives, we have opportunities to be able to integrate this framework. And my wish for you, and I want to challenge you, and I want to take you back as we close today. The first question I asked you about, over the past couple of weeks, have you had at least one opportunity where you were faced with having a conversation that might have been uncomfortable? And what I want you to do is to commit to yourself that, I'm going to use what we've talked about today. I'm going to be more confident, more empathetic, more professional as I engage in these conversations. And I'm going to go from saying, oh, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, to thinking about a story that my mother used to love to read with the Head Start students. The little engine that could, the I think I can, that I know I can. I know I can. We want to have a better workplace where I love to work and feel valued. That can be possible for you, and I know that you can make that happen. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today, and best wishes on the rest of your conference.
Vivian, thank you so much. And first, I want to say, audience, thank you so much for joining us for that session. Vivian, thank you so much for the valuable information that you provided on how to manage these difficult conversations, with confidence, empathy, and professionalism, and stressing the importance of seeing humanity first. There was a question that came in the chat. I love the presentation. Where do we find more information, more resources? I'll tell you right now, you can find them in the Resource Center. Along with all of the bios of all our presenters, you even have a chance to meet our vendors and register for some sweet door prizes in the exhibit hall. Everyone, we will see you back here after lunch, 12:45 p.m. for session 3.
Having worked in life sciences and healthcare for the past 2 decades, I've seen the real impact that innovators and collaborators can have on our communities. And we're just starting to realize the real promise of improving healthcare equity and lives.
One of the proudest accomplishments that we have achieved through the Deloitte Health Equity Institute is the impact that we have with our collaborators.
We've collaborated and invested in 25 organizations with 50 grantees and sub-grantees so that we can directly impact the lives of individuals, families, and communities.
Collaborations like ours with Deloitte is essential because if you think about health equity, it should be everyone has the right to do that. It should be everyone everywhere having access to be able to live a longer, healthier life, but that is not the case. I think harnessing the power of science and thought leadership and local community action is really why this collaboration with the Deloitte Health Equity Institute is really powerful.
It's so exciting for us to collaborate with the Deloitte Health Equity Institute. We have folks working in maternal health. We have folks working in food access and housing access. We're really learning together about what it takes to solve some really intractable challenges around social determinants of health.
The relationship with the Deloitte Health Equity Institute has been central to the design of our health equity unit, to developing a framework and really creating exponential impact. DHEI helped us to assess our infrastructure and some of the systemic issues surrounding health equity that we needed to look at.
And Deloitte has demonstrated to me what it really means to get on the field and make change.
We've created a scorecard. We've created a language guide where we're creating science-based practices that will help employers address equitable issues with their employees and in the communities that they do business. We challenge each other. We don't settle for what's easy. And we know that these issues that we're tackling did not happen overnight. And so the solutions are not going to come overnight.
At the Deloitte Health Equity Institute, we know that good business outcomes and good health outcomes can go hand in hand. When we come together with our collaborators, we can build on our impact. We can all help bridge the health equity gap for better health outcomes for all.